Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and everything is falling apart. The video game industry is in shambles, with mass layoffs, the president of Blizzard is gone, Diablo 4 Season 3 is the most hated thing ever, and everyone has gone insane and has become addicted to some Pokemon but not Pokemon game. In this week's news wrap-up video, we're going to talk about these three big topics. Blizzard losing about 20% of its staff, and why this happened. Why everyone seems to hate Diablo 4 Season 3, and how an indie dev went all in with some crazy business decisions to make the newest hit game that everyone is playing. And let's dive straight in with our first big story, and it's not a fun one. Microsoft this week has laid off a staggering 1,900 employees from its video game divisions, including Activision Blizzard and Xbox. That accounts for roughly 8% of their entire gaming division, which itself totals about 22,000 employees. Most of these layoffs, however, came from the Activision Blizzard side of things, so it's something closer to about 20% of Activision Blizzard's workforce that's been laid off. And this comes just a little over 3 months since Activision Blizzard and King joined the Microsoft family, a move that a lot of us saw as being the start of a new positive chapter in the history of Blizzard. So, not exactly the preface to the story that we were hoping for. Now, before anyone can say, typical corporation laying off a bunch of employees while the executives give themselves raises, Mike Ybarra, the president of Blizzard, has also packed his bags. Now remember, Ybarra was with Microsoft for 22 years before he joined Blizzard 4 years ago and soon became Blizzard's president. So I was really shocked to see Ybarra leaving. Now his departure wasn't framed as him being laid off because presidents of companies don't get laid off. They are told that they are deciding to leave on their own. But Ybarra, he seemed to love being president of Blizzard. He just had his first BlizzCon, and back in November, Ybarra actually told journalist Jason Schreier that he wanted to be with Blizzard for the long haul. His exact words were, quote, "Someone will drag me out of Blizzard. That's how long I will be there." So, yeah, interpret that as you will. Blizzard's new president will be announced next week. Can we just give it to Chris Metzen, please? We need some good news. And Ybarra isn't the only big name leaving Blizzard either. Alan Adham, Blizzard's chief design officer and the only founder of Blizzard still with the company, is also gone. And it doesn't even end there. Remember the survival game that Blizzard's been working on for the past 6 years, Odyssey? Yeah, that entire project has been canceled as well. They had a team of over 100 people working on this, some say close to 200 people. Most of these people have been laid off, some have been retained and moved on to other projects, but most are gone. Apparently Odyssey was just too ambitious of a project, even if it seemed promising to the people that got to playtest it. It was still years away from release, and Blizzard was hoping to hire hundreds more people in order to get it out by 2026. And I guess Microsoft said nope, which is a shame. I was looking forward to Odyssey. I thought, hey, a survival game with Blizzard's polish. I play a lot of survival games. It would be nice to see one made by Blizzard, but nope. Now, part of the issues with Odyssey stem from the fact that it was at first being prototyped on the Unreal Engine, and then they decided that they were going to move it to an internal engine called Synapse, which was originally developed for mobile games. So all that prototyping work that they had done on Unreal was basically wasted effort, and it's just always a giant nightmare when a game changes engine mid-development. But it wasn't just the Odyssey team that was cut. The Overwatch team saw major cuts. The lead narrative designer was laid off, half the environment art team, as well as numerous producers, VFX artists, designers, animators, 3D artists, and more. Some people who have been with Blizzard for over a decade. There's reports of the Blizzard Albany team being hit hard, who had moved on to Diablo 4 after their excellent work on Diablo 2 Resurrected. And yes, it is unfortunately normal to see layoffs following a merger. You end up with a lot of redundancies. Do you need to have 2 HR departments? Do you need to have 2 customer service departments? And the people who are going to be laid off in a case like this obviously are going to be from the newly acquired company, rather than the company that's doing the acquiring. But the scale that we're seeing here seems to be more than just trimming fat. We're talking about a significant chunk of talent, including community managers and entire internal support teams for ABK games, just being shown the door. And it's not just a matter of numbers, there's a human cost here. And while Blizzard has been the one making the biggest headlines with these layoffs, the gaming industry as a whole is facing a bit of a reckoning. Just last week we had Riot Games. They announced that they're cutting about 530 positions globally, which is about 11% of their workforce. Now, Riot, they'd been on a bit of a spending spree since 2019. They invested heavily in some new games and they expanded the company. Now they've admitted that their costs have spiraled to unsustainable levels, leaving them with no wiggle room for failure, which, let's be honest, is pretty crucial in a creative industry. That's why we've seen time and time again over the past couple of years, a company releases one bad single AAA game, a flop, and then that company is just shut down by its parent company. You just cannot financially recover from that. And here's a staggering number for y'all. Over 5,000 games industry workers have already lost their jobs in 2024. And January isn't even over. In less than 1 month, we've already seen over half of the total layoffs that we saw in 2023. So let's put those numbers in perspective. About 10,500 games industry workers were laid off in 2023. In 2022, it was around 8,500. And now in 2024, we're already at 5,600. Now, these numbers aren't just statistics. They represent people, careers, dreams. And I know some people are going to say, well, so what? That's just business. Everyone loses their jobs. It happens to everybody. It happens in all businesses and all sectors. And yeah, that's true. But if you enjoy games, if gaming is your hobby, if video games are an important part of your life, then you ought to care about the people who are making those games. I can tell you right now, there's a whole lot of aspiring game developers this week. Some young, brilliant minds who are just finishing their schooling, people that may go on to make the next great game, your next favorite game, who are now seeing all these layoffs and they're second-guessing their career choices and whether this industry is worth getting into. And all this is happening because of the pandemic. Because when lockdown started, the economy took a massive hit, so governments came in with their big heels to boost the economy, like by cutting interest rates dramatically, making the cost of borrowing money close to zero. And then because everyone was stuck at home, the video game industry boomed, because what else are you going to do all day? So game companies, they see their sales increasing, they see that it's really cheap to borrow money, so they start investing heavily into growth. Line go up, right? But then what happens? Lockdowns end. The pandemic growth of the industry stops because now people are going outside and touching grass. Interest rates rise again. Now all these companies that expanded rapidly during the pandemic can no longer afford all the salaries that they took on because they expected to see continued growth. It's like in a terribly balanced game where once you get all this high-level gear, then your gear repair costs are so freaking high that you just can't even afford to tackle the endgame content anymore, because it doesn't earn you enough money to offset the repair costs, like Diablo 3 at launch. So that's why we arrive in this position now where the industry as a whole has to go through an adjustment. It's got to scale back. Companies got to reevaluate their priorities. These layoffs are a stark reminder that no company, no matter how big or how successful, is immune to the realities of the market. And for all the talented folks who are affected by these layoffs, this sucks. This isn't your fault. I feel for you. Stay strong. But this is also a moment of opportunity. I was laid off back in 2016, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it allowed me to pursue what I'm doing today. There is still opportunity for you out there. New studios are cropping up all the time, and we just had an example of an indie company come out of nowhere and make an absolute ridiculous smash hit of a game. Palworld, right? And if that isn't the most encouraging thing that any game developer can see, I don't know what is. And that's the perfect segue into our next story here. Palworld is just dominating. 2 weeks ago, hardly anyone had even heard of this game. Now, it cannot stop breaking records. So, if you don't know, Palworld has been described as Pokemon with guns. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but basically, it's a game that has these cute pets that you go around capturing, like Pokemon, but there's also these survival elements and base building, kind of similar to Ark. So this game releases for about $30 on Steam Early Access, right? And within 8 hours, it has sold 1 million copies. 24 hours, 2 million. 40 hours, 3 million. Within 3 days, this game has sold 5 million copies. 4 days, 6 million. 5 days, 7 million copies sold by this indie dev, a team of 40 people. 6 days, 8 million copies sold. To put that in perspective, it's outpaced Pokemon Legends Arceus, which sold 6.5 million in a week. We're talking about a sales track that is basically a speedrun record. Now, I know most of you folks have heard of this game. A lot of you have tried it, but I know some of you aren't super familiar with it. So to explain it a bit more, think of the game Ark, right? That survival game Ark, but with a Pokemon twist. So instead of there being dinosaurs, you've got these pals, Palworld. They're these adorable creatures that are totally not Pokemon ripoffs. You collect these pals, you enslave them, and force them into hard labor to run your survival game camp. Also, there's guns. So it's equal parts whimsy and despotic sweatshop. Now, while the pals and how you capture them are clearly inspired by Pokemon, this game really is more than just a Pokemon knockoff. I know superficially it could kind of look like that, but it's really more Ark than it is Pokemon. It's a fully fleshed out survival game with its own identity. You're exploring a large world, you're capturing pals, you're surviving in a universe that borrows elements from Breath of the Wild, from Valheim, Ark, of course. There's even a bit of Satisfactory in there. And apparently this is exactly what gamers have been craving, because it has peaked at over 2 million concurrent players on Steam alone. Not even counting the Game Pass players. It surpassed Counter-Strike's peak of 1.8 million, Lost Ark's 1.3 million, Dota 2's 1.29, Cyberpunk's 1 million, Elden Ring's 950,000. It is second only to PUBG's 3.2 million. And again, that's not even counting Xbox players. This game was such an unexpected hit that as it was rapidly nearing 700,000 concurrent players, the devs had to have an emergency meeting with Epic Games because they run their multiplayer through Epic online services, and there was some pre-configured limit on the back end. I'm guessing it was some kind of DDoS protection, but they had to get Epic to manually remove the limit so that more people can play the game. Now, as with anything that becomes this big this fast, the game isn't without its controversy. A lot of Pokemon fans are pissed. The devs, Pocket Pair, they've been accused of stealing content. Nintendo is constantly being contacted by fans trying to get lawyers sent after Pocket Pair. The devs have received death threats, enough of them that multiple people on the dev team have brought it up. There are social media posts going viral that are showing comparisons of certain pals to certain Pokemon to reinforce that they've stolen designs. But the Pocket Pair CEO, Takuro Mizobe, he has expressed in interviews his confidence that they are not breaking any copyright laws. And in fairness, if they were, Nintendo likely would have shut that down immediately. Nintendo is known for being fiercely protective of its intellectual property, and they've been surprisingly quiet on Palworld. The game's development has been public for years. It's not like this came out of nowhere literally. They've had trailers and everything, and Nintendo hasn't done anything. Historically, Nintendo has sent out cease and desist letters within like 48 hours of the posting of trailers for even just fan-made Pokemon games. But in this case, nothing. In fact, Nintendo has made a public statement on the matter, but basically a public statement on how they're not doing anything. They said specifically, quote, "We have received many inquiries regarding another company's game released in January 2024. We have not granted any permission for the use of Pokemon intellectual property or assets in that game. We intend to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe on intellectual property rights related to the Pokemon." In other words, yes, we know this game exists, please stop spamming us about it. Meanwhile, Nintendo did send a cease and desist letter this week to someone who teased this Pokemon mod for Palworld. A mod that was allegedly importing assets from a Pokemon game and was also only available behind a Patreon paywall, which basically put it in the realm of a commercial project and thus a victim of Nintendo's fast-acting legal team. In response, popular modding platform Nexus Mods now refuses to host any Pokemon-themed Palworld mods out of fear of Nintendo. But as for Palworld itself, well, it's apparently not illegal to just be heavily inspired by something, as long as you aren't directly copying it. Now, if you've been playing Palworld, the devs put out a roadmap stating that their main priority now is going to be bug fixes, then AI and pathfinding, and then they later want to bring in PvP, endgame raid bosses, a PvP PAL arena, as well as new islands, new pals, new bosses, new technologies, and more. They also explained that the reason the Xbox version of the game is, let's just say, worse, is because they're at the mercy of Microsoft's certification process. On Steam, they can deploy patches whenever they want, basically, but Microsoft has this whole process. You gotta send in the patch, it goes into a queue to be reviewed, then it needs to be certified. You're limited in how often you can submit patches, so you get an early access game that just released, you're patching things quickly on Steam, right? And Microsoft just does not allow you the agility that Steam does to rapidly fix issues. And this isn't uncommon, sadly. For some cross-platform games, you see PC patches delayed because of the console certification process when they want to launch the patches at the same time. Then for other games, you have the PC version that can be like 4 patch versions ahead of the console version. But speaking of the devs themselves, the team behind Palworld is almost as fascinating as the game itself. It's like a modern-day Cinderella story, video game edition. Pocket Pair was this small 10-person indie studio, and they had a couple titles under their belt when they began work on Palworld. Now, early in development, the team, which had only worked within the Unity engine up to that point, they hired a veteran software engineer that had never worked in Unity before, and he convinced them all to remake Palworld in the Unreal engine, and basically had to teach them all Unreal. So the CEO, the one who did the hiring, he kept taking big risks like this. Like, he found some artist on Twitter who was really into making gun reload animations. And it turned out this artist was just a 20-year-old hobbyist who worked at a convenience store, never actually worked in the industry, had no official education in the industry. He just learned to animate from watching some YouTube videos. But the CEO, Mitsobe, he gave him a job, he helped him relocate and find housing in their city, because he felt that getting gunplay right was so important for the game, and this kid clearly knew his stuff and just had a passion for guns. Now, the original plan for Palworld was to develop the game in 1 year, but as the project was crystallizing, Mizobe realized that they were onto something big, and he didn't want to have to dial back the scope just to meet a deadline, and he didn't want budget to constrain the vision, so he gave the team another year. He grew his team from 10 to 40 people, and he spent basically the entire budget of all their sales from their previous game, which is the equivalent of $7 million US, just going all in on Palworld. And look at that. It's paid off in spades. Alright now, on to depressing news. Diablo 4 Season 3 launched this week, and apparently everyone hates it. I was actually genuinely shocked by how much people don't like Season 3. If you go on social media, if you go on Reddit, I have not seen this much negativity about the game in a long time. I'm just going to call out some highly upvoted post titles here. So far, at level 52, this feels worse than Season 1. Diablo 4 fundamentally lacks creativity. Right now, Diablo 3 feels better than Diablo 4. Traps. Annoying, not innovative. Talk about a great step backwards. The dev team needs to be replaced. This season is so bad that I actually went back to play my Eternal character. Why does a game made by a $74 billion company feel so cheap? Honestly, do the devs play the game they create? What is their obsession with making players do everything except kill more monsters? It's impossible a dev team worked on this for 6 months. There is absolutely no way a single person playtested the vaults. Emergency apology campfire dev chat when? I can't do another vault. I just can't. There's no way they imagined we could enjoy this. Can we go back to Season 2? Who at Blizzard thought adding trap rooms to the game was a good idea? I'm not mad, just disappointed. Big shout out to the D4 team for making the Battle Pass rewards so boring that I don't feel tempted in any way to purchase them. I mean, the situation's so bad that it's literally making headlines. I'm seeing gaming websites reporting on how much people aren't liking Season 3. So to get a little bit more granular here, to expand on what the criticism is. So the vaults, some of the new content, these are dungeons filled with traps, and the objective and purpose of the gameplay is to get you to avoid getting hit by the traps. You cannot just tank through them because it's not about dying to the traps, it's about losing buff stacks. If you get hit by a trap, you lose a buff stack, and therefore you get less loot at the end of the vault. I'm simplifying, but that's the short answer of how that works. Now, as soon as I saw that this was being added to the game, I right away thought, okay, people are either going to love or hate this. It's new gameplay, so a tip of the hat for coming up with new gameplay, but traps slow down the game considerably, especially when the objective is to avoid the trap, and when you have a lot of stuff happening in the game at the same time. You're fighting monsters, there's particle effects, all kinds of stuff that's obscuring your vision. It brings the game to a grinding halt when you are punished for even just getting touched by a trap, and I suspected that people probably would not enjoy that. And for the most part, it seems people don't. There are some people that do, but we saw this happen with Path of Exile. They, very early in Path of Exile's life, they added something called the Labyrinth, which is this elaborate trap structure that you navigate through in order to gain a permanent boon on your character. It's something that you only have to do a few times. It's not grindable, repeatable content. Okay. You could grind it. You don't have to, though. Let's put it that way. Everyone has to do it a bit, but you don't have to grind it. And in general, people hate it in PoE as well. So, in so many ways, this season has been the season of Path of Exile, to the point that it's even taking things that are hated in Path of Exile to put it into Diablo 4. And I don't think this is intentional. This is why I just find it funny that there's so many parallels. Then, vaults aside, there is the robot companion, the Seneschal. That's been criticized for feeling underwhelming, and I agree. I also don't really feel the impact of the pet companion. The new overworld events, the vaults are new dungeon type activities. The new overworld events, Robotide, let's call it, not as fun as Season 2. Season 2 Bloodtide was overtuned, which made it so fun. Now we're going to something that's more balanced. Robotide is better balanced than Bloodtide, but that means by comparison, it's going to be less fun, unfortunately. Now, I really don't want to say this because I'm going to get shit on for saying it, but I am having fun playing Diablo 4 in Season 3. But as I think about it, I'm having fun in spite of Season 3 and not because of Season 3 for the most part. And the reason I say that is that I'm basically actively ignoring most of the Season 3 stuff, and my fun is coming more so just from, I'm playing a new character, a new build. I haven't done this build in a while. So specifically, I'm playing a Bone Spear Necro. I played Bone Spear back in Season 1. Now I'm playing Bone Spear again. Progression is faster. Overall, the game has been improved since Season 1, so I'm comparing my Season 1 experience, I'm vastly preferring my Bone Spear Necro now, especially working in the new ossified, the new aspect, the new Bone Spirit aspect, which gives me tremendous resource generation, so I'm really liking the building and the progression and all that, but the pet companion, for instance, I just ignore it. It effectively doesn't exist for me. I felt it when I first spec'd it to generate resource for me. That was the first time that I actually felt an impact, when I found the tuning stone that lets it generate resource. And then since then, like ever since level, I don't know, 20, 30, whenever I got that, I've basically not felt the pet companion since then. And I also feel no incentive to level it up. 10 levels on the tuning stones, it's so much, it's going to take so long. I figure, eventually it's going to get stronger, but it's out of my mind. I literally don't care about it. Then the vaults, I much prefer doing vaults to doing nightmare dungeons. I'm really happy that I can run vaults instead of nightmare dungeons. They're faster to run. You can get all the same stuff you get from nightmare dungeons in vaults. There's no boss fight at the end. There's a more exciting big battle with a bunch of monsters. But I play vaults by basically ignoring their intended purpose. Rather than bother with the traps, I just plow through everything. I don't bother to get any stacks. I don't bother with the chests at the end. I just speedrun it because it's just frustrating to have to navigate the traps, to slow down the gameplay, and then so easily lose stacks when it's so hard to see everything going on screen, and there's so much crowd control, and there's so much getting knocked around. And I'm not even on a melee build. I could only imagine how miserable it would be on a melee build. I do think the Outer World activity, the Robotide, is the most successful aspect of Season 3. Again, if we had this before Bloodtide, I think it would have been very well received. Because it's an improvement over not having anything else. Again, compared to Bloodtide, it's always going to feel worse. The one thing that I dislike about the overworld activity is all the knockback on those traps. Very frustrating to go grab the core and constantly get knocked back. But yeah, a lot of the feedback that I see revolves around these elements added to the game that slow us down and stop us from focusing on just killing monsters. So I think what's happening is that the devs are trying to introduce new gameplay, but it's coming in forms that are, again, largely slowing down the game, because it's like, well, here's objectives, and objectives are going to stop us from killing monsters, therefore slowing down our progression, slowing down our XP acquisition, slowing down our loot acquisition, slowing down the gameplay in general. And so I think what people want isn't so much more things to do that is not killing monsters, but just different ways of experiencing killing monsters. For instance, going through a dungeon, that's one way that you can kill monsters, but another thing would be an arena where waves of enemies come at you. It's different gameplay. You're going to be on a more stationary build. I mean, we have these in Diablo 3, right? We have the, I don't know what doodad they're called, Echoing Nightmare, I think, where you will change your build because now you are more stationary and, waves of increasingly difficult monsters come at you. Greater Rifts is another different form of gameplay where you're on a timer and you're just plowing through, and no loot drops until the very end, because it's all about that momentum and acceleration and going fast, and there's just that really satisfying explosion of loot at the very end. Similarly, Bloodtides, right, they introduced new gameplay as well. You go, you turn in, and then waves of enemies come at you, so that was, again, very successful. Bloodtide, I think, was super successful. And so I'm hoping that when the Gauntlet is introduced later on, we are going to see something more in that realm, where here's a new activity. The objective is killing monsters, but it's giving us a different way in which we're going to be killing the monsters, which is the sort of varied gameplay here. Now, meanwhile, the devs have acknowledged the feedback. Earlier in the week, Joe Shelley posted that they've looked at feedback and they've agreed that there are several things that could be improved. And then Friday night, we got a patch with some nice changes. It's now going to be easier to level up the robot, which will enable us to get it to higher level faster, which will hopefully make it feel more impactful. The Pearl now grants 10 stacks of warding instead of 3, so it's going to be easier to keep up your stacks when you're doing vaults, to get the chests at the end. They removed the knockback from all the obelisk hazards, thank goodness, great change. They made a number of changes to traps to make them generally easier to avoid. And again, these are all good changes that are making things better, but I don't know that they're actually going to be turning things around. For those of us who are actually playing Season 3 and enjoying ourselves, this is nice, but for people that are saying they hate Season 3, I don't think this is going to make them come back. Overall, though, I think what this has highlighted is our desperate need for a PTR, a test server. This has served us tremendously well in Diablo 3, and I think it would serve us even better in Diablo 4, particularly given how fast the devs are to act on feedback. I mean, it was just a matter of days before they put out this patch. So imagine we had a 1-week PTR before launch. They could rapidly rebalance some stuff, retune some stuff, so that when the season launches, we don't have everyone freaking the hell out. Same thing with duping exploits. Once again this season, we have trade disabled because of duping exploits. But I turn the question to you folks. What camp do you find yourselves in? What are your thoughts on Season 3? Are you gonna keep playing? Are you gonna try the Gauntlet when it releases? And maybe the bigger question here, what do you hope to get from a season? Because one thing that we gotta separate out here is that there are fundamental issues with Diablo 4 that are being worked on and that need to be resolved. And then there's what do we want from a season? For instance, itemization, right? Itemization is busted and is being worked on. A season theme isn't something that's supposed to fix a problem with the game. So what is like your ideal season theme? So for myself, for instance, an ideal season theme is going to give me a different way of leveling my character such that starting from level 1, I am engaging in a new kind of activity. So Blood Titan Season 2 was super ideal for me in that case, in that regard. Season 2 dropped off in the end game in that it did not also give me something in the end game. So that's the second thing that I want. I want something in the end game for me to engage with new end game content. And while it wasn't part of the season theme, they did roll it out into the base game. They gave us the Uber bosses. Okay, I can farm Uber bosses. That's sort of new content to do in the end game. But I actually think, in theory, the vaults would have been a more successful implementation. Season 3 vaults, I'm not doing Nightmare Dungeons anymore. Now I'm doing vaults because they're actually more rewarding. So, traps aside, and, you know, if you ignore the intended way vaults ought to be played, vaults are very successful in the way I choose to play them, which is just, again, plow through and run them like more efficient Nightmare Dungeons. I'm glad I'm doing that instead of Nightmare Dungeons. So, in that way, successful. And then the third thing that I want from a season is that it introduces some kind of new mechanic, right? So the robot, in this case, the Seneschal, gives me a new way to gain power, gives me some new progression system. It's unfortunate that it feels unimpactful, but in theory, had it felt impactful, then I would have had everything that I wanted in a season. So overall, for me, Season 3, it's, in theory, on paper, it's all stuff that seems like it would have checked all my boxes. In practice, it just doesn't end up being as fun as it felt like it ought to have been. Oh, and it should go without saying, of course, new items, new options for new builds, shaking up meta, always new items, new things. But that's like not even part of the season theme. Again, it's almost a given. But again, that's me. How about you folks? What do you ideally want out of a season? Sound off in the comments. And just before we wrap up this video here, folks, I want to point you to a video that I posted this week. Now, it is a sponsored video, but I really like this game. The game is called Enshrouded. It's a game that mixes a number of different genres. It's a survival game, but it's got a little bit of kind of Diablo or ARPG itemization and skill trees, a little bit of that. It feels a bit like Breath of the Wild and the exploration. It feels like an Elden Ring with how you're fighting enemies. And I play a lot of games like this with my partner and my friends, and I feel this is going to be my new favorite game to play off stream. And I would really like to actually work this into my rotation of a game that I stream and that I make content for. That would be contingent on you guys liking the game as well. So if you want to check out that video, get an idea of what Enshrouded is all about. If it's a game that you are interested in and excited about, then I'm interested and excited to make content about it. I'm going to be playing the game regardless off stream. I'm going to be doing all the research on the best tips, on the best beginner guides and everything, and that's how I started my Diablo content. I was doing all this research for myself, and I'm like, well, I've learned all this stuff. Let me make a video to share information with people. And there happened to be an audience that wanted to hear that information, and here we are 10 years later. But anyway, folks, that wraps up this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, and be sure to have checked out last week's video, in which we discussed how the CEO of Larian, the guys who made Baldur's Gate 3, is fighting the good fight to stand up for us. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.